I'm Salavalo, and I have been to every single country in the world. And while I often talk about my favorite countries, the best countries, and rank countries by scariest, most exciting, whatever, I very rarely go down a little level and think about the cities. So today, I'm going to share with you my favorite cities in the entire world. We will start with a city that I think is the best in the world, absolutely. I've lived there for quite a few years, and that's New York. Nothing beats New York. I call it the center of the universe. And New York is always moving fast. There's always things to do. People are always there. You know, I lived there for like 4 years, and I was never able to do all that I wanted. But you know, every month I would go to a Broadway show. Every week we would try like a new amazing restaurant. There are so many different neighborhoods in the city that we love to go and explore. One of my favorite things to do in New York was to try and walk the entire island of Manhattan. So it's something like 14 miles from the top to the bottom, but you can do it in a whole day. There's nowhere quite like New York, and I was lucky to spend some of my teenage years there. Also, New York has some of the best food. Not only all the Michelin star restaurants, but really good gross hot dogs on the side of the streets, and the parawa, the Puerto Rican ice drink, and then of course the famous New York pizza. Nothing can beat it. What makes a city my favorite? I think that there are 4 main things. The first is that I want it to be unique. Being able to feel that everywhere you go in the city, it looks like that city. That it has a really strong identity. Another city that I think is absolutely one of the best in the world, and I've also spent quite a bit of time there, is Berlin. I lived there in Berlin the summer when I was 18, the summer in between boarding school and college, and it was such a fun age to be in a city like Berlin. Berlin is such a young city because it was literally split down the middle for decades, and so it was 2 cities, and it only unified right in the 90s, and so that means that it's still trying to figure out what its identity is. The neighborhoods are still trying to figure out what role they play in the overarching city. So every time that you go back there, it's almost completely different. So Berlin's really exciting because it has this constant change and this vibe of newness. And in addition to that, Berlin has so much fascinating history, not just with the wall, but for a lot of German history is there in the city. It's been a center of that for so long, but there's so much exciting innovation happening now. It's one of the best cities for startups in the world. So there's a lot of young people doing really cool thing in Berlin, and of course the art, not only the Museum Island, but all of the new contemporary art galleries. I love Berlin. I'm going back, I think, in a month. I try and go every year. I have a lot of family there. So I'm excited to be back in Europe's best city. Because sometimes you'll be in the middle of a big city and it looks like every single other big city in the world. But the best cities have this vibe that you can tell no matter where you're at that you are there. The second thing is energy. For me, to like a city, I need there to be lots going on, lots of people walking everywhere, people enjoying in tons of different ways. One of my favorite cities that I don't think I've spent enough time in is Melbourne, or Melbourne, I guess is how you guys say in Australia. Somebody will correct me, I'm sure. But I have been 3 times to Australia, but only once to Melbourne. And I was only there for 3 days, but I had the most amazing 3 days. And that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about walkability. I just walked all around the city, and it's so green, it's so open. There's the little river running through it, and there's also so much to do. I walked to the cricket ground, I saw a ballet performance, I went into the Royal Museum that's there, and it's a perfect example of urban space. It's a perfect example of having a city that's full of activities to do. I've always said that I want to go back for the Australian Open, so hopefully that'll be the next time that I am in Australia, in Melbourne, and Melbourne? I'm just gonna say Melbourne, whatever, I don't know. But yeah, I thought that was such a great city, and kind of a low-key one. The third bit is walkability. I love going for long walks When I'm in a city, usually I won't make any plans. All I will do is go outside, walk the entire day. Whenever I'm hungry, stop. You know, whenever there's something I want to see, like go and find it, get lost. I always just keep enough money in my pocket to get a taxi back to the hotel. And if you have no idea where you are, that's fine. You can always find your way back. The city that I was most surprised about how much I enjoyed it was Moscow. And I've been now to Moscow 3 times, and each time I've loved it. It does feel a little bit inaccessible. I think that in general, Russia and Russian-speaking countries are the hardest to kind of experience if you don't speak the language, but it didn't like get in the way of having a good time. I was lucky that I have a lot of Russian friends, and when I was there I was always hosted by them, and I always was shown around by them. But I did get time on my own to just like walk through the city, like walk in the like crazy undergrounds, like in some of the parks, like go to some of the museums. And Russia's another one of these places that has a really fascinating juxtaposition between like old history, like hundreds of years old history, and then like the remnants of Soviet times, you know, with these like very boring, like dreary looking buildings, and then like modernity, like fun clubs and fun restaurants and like amazing places to go. And so I've always enjoyed Moscow. It's a place I'd love to explore more. I remember like the first time I went was perfect, even though it was winter when it was very cold. I went with my now ex-girlfriend, and we visited our friend from university, and we stayed at the St. Regis and had this like gorgeous room. We went to like the White Rabbit, which is still one of my favorite like restaurants I've ever been, with this incredible view of the entire city. And then we went out to some like crazy clubs more until early in the morning, and it was just like the perfect night in this like global city, and kind of made me feel just like young and excited. And I'd love to go back to Moscow for like a longer amount of time and get to know the city better, because I've always only been there for a few days at a time as a tourist. It'd be awesome to go back, and I was really surprised at how much I liked it. The city that I'm most excited to return to is Tokyo. And that's because Japan was the first country that I ever visited, and I haven't been back since then. So that was in 2004, and I was 13 years old. So I'm very excited to go back. I actually have a trip planned for my birthday in September. I'm going to spend like 10 days in and around Japan. I cannot wait for that. Tokyo is the world's biggest city. It's so full of lights, amazing food again, and like Japanese culture and all of its historical and modern and futuristic forms. It's also one of the cleanest cities in the world and one of the safest cities in the world. I remember like walking under bridges in Japan when I was there as a child and like kind of being afraid, but then seeing like even the homeless people had all of their like clothes on hangers and everything like organized in proper boxes. Tokyo is a place that to me feels the most foreign. Like it's one of the places that has both like embraced modernity but kind of pushed back on kind of like the Western hegemony, and so that's really exciting to see, and I would love to see if it's still like that. I mean, that's definitely how I felt when I went in 2004. But I would imagine that that feeling hasn't changed too much in the past 15 years. But now that I think about it, 15 years is a really, really long time. Kind of makes me feel old, but anyway, I'll be there in a month. I'll make sure that I'm going to post a lot of videos from Tokyo, and let's see if it's still one of my favorite cities in the entire world. And the final bit is activities. Like I love going to sporting events. I love going to like art museums and art galleries. I love when there are like festivals. I love when there is like unique things happening in that city that like make you excited to be there and want to come back. And of course, I can't talk about my favorite cities in the world without talking about my home, my absolute favorite place to be, Abu Dhabi. Why I love Abu Dhabi is that it's small and it feels small. It feels like there's like a close-knit community, and yet it's globally relevant, globally powerful, and it's always changing. There's always so many new things popping up, so many new things to do, and it's always improving. It's aware of its problems and it's trying to get better. I think that living here for the past 8 years has been like phenomenal to see, you know, all of the growth in the city and to see it becoming really like a central city for the world. I also love Abu Dhabi because it feels Arab. Like, I think that a lot of the Middle East has these like exciting, growing global cities that are very cosmopolitan and very modern, but they don't always feel Arab, and people like think that some of that like tradition is being lost. But in Abu Dhabi, like I constantly feel that, like I feel like it's an Emirati city more than anything. You know, you always are seeing people in the local dress, you're always hearing the call to prayer. You know, we have like our date souk, you know, there's the desert is so close, and all, you know, Abu Dhabi's an island. So having that like water culture, I think you can always feel in Abu Dhabi that this is a city in the Emirates in Arabia. When I think of the most beautiful city, I always think of Rio de Janeiro. I like the way that it is with the cliffs or the mountains like falling into the ocean is just phenomenal. Of course, going on the top to Christ the Redeemer and getting like the view out of the entire city, and of course all the beautiful beaches like Copacabana. It's just like a fun place to be, and everywhere you look it's pretty stunning. Like when you look up and you see the green and you see the ocean. I just always loved being there. In general, I like Brazil. I went for New Year's in 2010 turning into 2011, and it was a great time. Though Rio is also very quickly like can become a very seedy experience, right? Like I think there's a lot of opportunity in Rio to go to the bad side, so that you know, you have to avoid those temptations and those risks as well. A city that I think is kind of underrated, but absolutely one of the best cities in the world, and definitely the best city on the continent of Africa, is Nairobi. I was lucky, I've lived there for like 6 or more months, and I visit maybe like a dozen times. And Nairobi is fantastic. Not only is it beautiful and walkable and always changing, but there's like so much happening. There's a fantastic amount of like startups and young people like being really innovative and having like cool new companies. There's a big NGO community that's you know, trying to make a difference. Keyword trying. There's a lot of like business happening. There's more and more galleries opening up. There's like fantastic fashion. There's amazing like photographers. So that's kind of how I always like spent my time there, is going to different festivals, like meeting with different artists. And I love that. I also feel like Nairobi is very good at like bridging the gap between having its own unique identity and being Kenyan and being African, and kind of like the push of the West. I'm lucky that most of my friends were Kenyans, and I speak Swahili, I speak the language, so we were able to like connect on that. But yeah, I think if I would live anywhere other than Abu Dhabi or New York, it'd probably be Nairobi. I wanted to also list a couple places quickly that I really enjoy, that are fantastic cities, but for one reason or the other, I didn't put in my like top 8 best cities in the world. Damascus. I think that Damascus has more history than almost any city in the entire world. Probably actually has more history than anywhere else, has been involved in so many different civilizations, and that's reflected in the architecture and the mix of the people. And of course the food is some of the best in the world, but I'm not calling it the best city in the world just because it's like hard to access now, and like you can't get like the full Damascus experience. Another like honorable mention is Tbilisi, Georgia. We are here in Tbilisi, Georgia. It's my second time. Last time I was here was 3 years ago. I'm very excited to be back and to show you guys some of the good things to see. I think it's a fantastic place to go for like 3 days. Like great food, incredible to walk around and see so much. Maybe just a little bit like smaller than what I would call some of these other like best cities in the world. I also didn't put any Indian city on the list. India and I have a love-hate relationship. I've talked about in a lot of other videos, and I really like Delhi and Kerala and Bangalore, but my favorite city in India has to be Mumbai. I lived there for 3 months. It has that energy, it has that walkability, it has like constant things going on, but it's just a little bit too difficult and out of my comfort zone to say it's my like one of my favorite cities in the world. There's also Cape Town. Tons of people always say that Cape Town is their favorite city. I think Cape Town's like a good vacation spot. Cape Town is nice, but a lot of places are really nice. There's no city from Southeast Asia, so no Singapore, no Hong Kong, no Bangkok, And I think I get like a little bit overwhelmed by those cities. They're a little bit too big, too fast, and like the weather's never great. Singapore I've been to like 4 times, Bangkok I've been to a couple times, and I enjoy them. Very good food, but just like not my like favorite cities in the world. Another one that is like really high up on my list, but like doesn't necessarily like not a top favorite, is Freetown in Sierra Leone. I loved Freetown. I thought it was like beautiful with like the cliffs going into the ocean, like the red dirt earth and like the green trees and blue sky. Like I thought it was gorgeous. And actually the kind of that description I just gave is the same that I always give of Kigali. You know, like Africa's cleanest city and another city that's constantly growing and changing. But I guess neither of them is like big enough or like has enough going on for me to say that they're my favorites. And then lastly, Berlin was the only European city that I put on the list. You know, Paris, Rome, London, Madrid, even Belgrade. All of these cities are fantastic and I love spending time in them, and they definitely fit the criteria of like being unique, and like anywhere you are in Rome, you can tell that you're in Rome. Definitely the same for Paris, and I love that. I still think Berlin's the best city in Europe. All of these cities are great. I love time in them, but not the top of the list. So I hope that you enjoyed this list of my favorite cities in the world. Tell me down below what your favorite cities are. I always respond to every comment. So subscribe, follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and I hope that you will have a good day and that you will travel safe.